Thank you very much, Hjalmar and Rasmus. This was a lovely introduction. I really like that the questions and answers. It helps me figure out who I'm interacting with. So in that sense, I would love to have this be a open discussion. The idea is that we all maximize what we're learning, myself included. So I would love to hear your thoughts and your input on whatever we're going to be talking about today. And I just want to build on Rasmus, one of Rasmus's comments, that it's important to build evidence about what we're doing so that we can better use our resources and make smarter decisions as a society and build a better world for everybody. So with that, I will start my presentation. You will see here that I am in my presentation. I hope that's okay for everybody. And at the bottom, there is a automatic translation or of what I'm saying. So hopefully that is helpful for people who may find it useful to be reading what I'm saying. All right, so I'm going to be talking, as you know, about business accelerators, and these are the 4 questions that I would like to answer. So first of all, what is a business accelerator? Are accelerators useful? What type of design features do accelerators have? And why is this conversation even important? So let's start with the first question, which is, what is a business accelerator? I'm not going to spend too much time on this, because if you are interested in knowing more about this, I would really recommend that you look into these authors right over here. These authors, you have Cohen and Hochberg in 2014 wrote a piece that described business accelerators, and then Cohen, Bingham, and Hallen describe it in more detail. But in a nutshell, accelerators are short-term, limited duration, cohort-based educational programs for new ventures. Okay. Now, there are different typologies of business accelerators, and if you're interested in the different typologies, I recommend that you read this article written in a Nesta blog and publication by Clarice, Mike Wright, and Van Hove. And they talk about 3 different types of accelerators. There's the investor-led accelerators, there's the ecosystem accelerators, and the matchmaker accelerators. And very briefly, the investor-led, they all have different objectives, but they also have objectives that are in common. So the common objective is to accelerate new ventures, but the unique objectives are different to some degree. So the investor-led objectives or the investor-led accelerators focus on trying to identify high potential startups, okay, in which they could invest. And then we have the ecosystem accelerators that are trying to improve the entrepreneurship ecosystem in their regions and their countries. So by having an accelerator or funding an accelerator, what they're trying to do is increase the number of startups in that region, the ability of those startups to build scalable businesses, and also they're helping to connect startups with investors and also increase the number of investments that are made. Okay. And then we have the matchmaker accelerators, which are typically large corporations that are trying to promote an ecosystem around one of their key products or services. So their objective is basically to connect new products with their existing customers, as long as they use their platforms. Now, one of the interesting things I think about accelerators, especially when we contrast them to incubators, is their ideological design, okay? And if you think about accelerators, and I have to present to you my little son who just woke up and is walking into my room instead of going into go to see mommy, but I will continue here. So one of the things that I think is interesting here about accelerators and incubators is that the way that both programs kind of emerged from ideological logic. So some people might say that incubators are very much like accelerators, but and other people might say that incubators have actually adopted certain accelerator designs. But I want to tell you about the key differences. Incubators typically emerged as a government or state-based program that aimed at helping new ventures surpass the market frictions of the liability of newness. The liability of newness is essentially this idea that new ventures are weaker because they are new, and therefore they need a sort of incubator. You can think of an incubator like for small chickens and that need protection from the environment. Okay, and so incubators were born and emerged from a humanitarian logic. So basically, it's like we need to protect these fledgling organizations that are sort of weak and that they cannot, if we put them into the market, they will most likely die. Okay. In contrast, this other model, which is accelerators, is a newer model in the world, and it emerged from this idea from investors. So basically, they wanted to get a look at potential companies, and their approach was more of a Darwinian approach. So basically, survival of the fittest, natural selection, and they actually have a competition. It's all about competition. So you have a competition to get in, you have a competition to get out, to graduate, and you compete against peers, and it's a fixed timeline. So basically, the participants in accelerators are in the residency in the accelerator from 3 to 6 months. In contrast, incubators, at least when they were originally designed, had a residency of 3 to 5 years. So basically, they built these protected spaces until the ventures were strong enough to face the real world. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. They're just different. And in some conditions, especially with projects that require much longer periods to build or to create, incubators could be a good model. Okay, but I think it's important to understand that that these two types of organizational forms have significantly different ideological designs or logics. Okay, so let's go to the next question. Are accelerators actually useful? Should we even care about this? And one thing why we should actually ask ourselves this question is because business accelerators have become a predominant organizational form in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. Okay, according to Crunchbase, in their data set, there are almost 3,000 accelerators. So we could safely assume that there are more than 3,000 accelerators worldwide, because only in Crunchbase there are 3,000 registered. Now, one of the practitioner articles that I think caught my attention here in 2015 was this comment or this title saying that business accelerators are like the new business schools for entrepreneurs. And that got us thinking. And if you think about kind of like the mechanisms of business schools and compare those mechanisms of business schools to a accelerator, you find an interesting parallels. Okay. So for example, for business schools, how do they change and influence people, right? So you've got the reputation, of course. So a certification, if you go into a high quality or highly reputed business school, you basically assimilate that reputation for yourself and you put it on your curriculum. Then, of course, there's a mechanism of learning, know-how. There's a mechanism of social networks and social capital. So basically, you get connected to other people who have high social capital, and therefore you also acquire part of that high social capital. Then there's this other mechanism, which is the self-efficacy. So essentially, increasing your belief in your abilities actually makes you more likely to persist, to persevere, to perform. And then there's this last mechanism, which is structured accountability. So basically, a series of goals or exams or classworks or timelines where students or participants are somewhat expected to execute, right? And so business accelerators have a very similar structure as business schools. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that in the last decade or so, there have been a focus from the research literature on this concept called managerial capital, which essentially what they did is they did a series of randomized control trials on established companies, so companies that already existed, they were already selling, they had several years of operation, and they took a control group and a treatment group, and the treatment group, they taught those managers or the owners of those companies certain things that you would typically learn in a business school, like managing your inventory, using accounting systems, et cetera, et cetera. And what they found is that when they taught those people these things, those companies that were in the treatment group increased their performance relative to the control group. So that's where managerial capital, this idea of managerial capital, comes from. And in fact, before managerial capital, an important idea was financial capital. And it is also seen that if you take two people or two companies that are identical, with the only difference that one has money and the other one does not, the company with money is more likely to be successful relative to the company that doesn't have money, even though everything else is the same. So that's why financial capital is also an important thing. So here comes, in the last decade, this idea of managerial capital. And what we did with my co-author, Juanita Gonzalez Uribe, is we did also an experimental design on business accelerators to see if business accelerators had an effect on new ventures in the process of creating themselves and growing and scaling. And our result was a resounding yes. In fact, if you see here from our experiment, we had a control group, a treatment group, and those people who were in the treatment group actually increased their likelihood of raising capital in 21%, 300% or 3 times the amount of capital raised, 24% greater market traction, sales, or subscribers, and then 200% more jobs.
So Michael, the control group, they just sat around and tried to do the best they could with their business to develop it, and the other group were part of an accelerator.
That's a great question. Thank you very much for that question. So the control group here in our study were basically people who were also in the accelerator. They received money from the accelerator, but they did not get all these other things, which is what we call entrepreneurship schooling. Okay, so basically it's they both have the finances, the financial capital, but only the treatment group has this entrepreneurship schooling that I'm talking about. So essentially what we said is we treated the business accelerator schooling component as a black box, right? And this is what we found as a consequence of participating in this black box. But the natural next question comes is, well, what of all these mechanisms is actually working here? So that's kind of what follows on the research literature in this regard. So I guess, yeah. So and I'm going to talk in a few minutes about this specific mechanism, which is a paper that is currently well advanced and in the process of being reviewed. So a second mechanism. So I talked about entrepreneurial capital. A second mechanism that accelerators have, or a second effect that accelerators have, is on the ecosystem. Okay, and if you're interested in an ecosystem, there's this really great paper by Dan Federer and Hochberg in 2014 that looks at how accelerators appear to have an effect on increasing the regional supply of venture capital investment. And the story, or the argument, or what they argue is, the authors argue, is that the fact that business accelerators have this demo day at the end of each cohort, right? We're talking about 6 or 3 month periods, 6 month periods, and at the end they have this demo day, which is essentially like a party where you showcase all the startups. This brings together investors from the region or from the location, and they start comparing notes. and they start kind of getting into this competitive vibe where, oh, how are you doing? Oh, and one investor says, I invested in such a startup. Oh, and how's that going? And obviously the investor is going to say, it's going great, because otherwise it would be a little bit embarrassing. So the investor who's asking the question is saying, oh, well, since my colleague is going into investing, maybe I should do so too, right? So of course, that's a speculation of the mechanism, but what they found is that essentially business accelerators have an effect on the regional supply of venture capital investment. And the third dimension that I would like to bring your attention to is the culture, so the local culture. And here, this is a paper that I have with Chuck Easley, where we look at how the social interaction between different groups of entrepreneurs. So in this case, our setting is Startup Chile, and Startup Chile is a business accelerator that is open to the rest of the world. So we have 20% of participants are from Chile, roughly 20% are from the United States, 10% I think are from India and different parts of the world. So these entrepreneurs from different parts of the world come to this program with specific beliefs and behaviors. And what we find is that the social interaction actually improves the beliefs and behaviors of the domestic entrepreneurs. So this graph here, what it shows is that the green points are the treatment group, the red points are the control group. The control group are people who are equivalent to the people in the treatment group, except for the fact that they did not get into the accelerator. And what we find is that as a consequence of interacting with these other individuals, the people that get into the accelerator actually change their behaviors that are important for entrepreneurship. In other words, there's a learning mechanism. And if you read the paper, if you're interested, you can download it in the SSRN, which is a platform for working papers. You'll find here that there's also changes in the beliefs of these entrepreneurs. So if you're interested in this, you can look at that in more detail. So now let's go to the next question.
Sorry,
yes.
Sorry, Michael. Startup Chile is highly competitive. I think, what is it, 50,000 startups that apply every year, and they take in how many? 20, 40, 30?
Yeah. So they take in about 10% of the applicants.
Yeah. So wouldn't that, you could say, wouldn't that always happen if you are suddenly together with some people that are more ambitious than you are, that have gone through greater strides to get where they are at? Wouldn't that in any way, whether it was a business accelerator or not, somehow rub off on you? There are also some great studies on how, if one obese person arrives at a military camp, then suddenly how that can be infecting, both in positive and negative ways. So it's not, I'm just saying, can the accelerator, can it be something else than the accelerator be the reason behind?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Rasmus. So that's why it's important to look at the empirical design of the paper. And since we only have 15 minutes in total, I don't want to spend too much time explaining the details, but I'm happy to talk about that later. But the two mechanisms, just to answer your question, is there's a social learning mechanism and there's a social comparison mechanism. And those two theories, which is social learning and social comparison, are very well studied theories, and they're fascinating. You might want to look into how those two mechanisms work. So it's social comparison and social learning. All right. So next one is, how do accelerators work? And here's a series of papers that have recently been published that I want to just draw your attention to. So there's high levels of heterogeneity in accelerator design. So basically some features actually work better than others. And so there's this paper by Cohen, Bingham, and Hallen that focus on reducing the satisficing. The satisficing is when you basically reach a certain goal and you satisfice with that goal, even though you could continue going and pushing forward more, you just don't because you're satisficing. So basically, what they focus on is that accelerators that provide concentrating consultation with advisors or transparency between venture peers, in other words, that they share information, and standardized programs as opposed to tailored programs actually improve the venture performance of their participants. There's another mechanism that has to do with resolving uncertainty. So for example, encouraging entrepreneurs or ventures to experiment and interact with market stakeholders also reduces or resolves the uncertainty and helps people make better decisions. And then there's the increasing learning and certification. So these are also mechanisms that we've seen in business schools and what we argue is also in the entrepreneurship school, that is the business accelerator. And so we're talking about advice from mentors and then also signaling quality to customers and potential investors. And the last mechanism, I'm calling it here fleeing from freedom. In other words, running away from freedom, which in itself seems like a contradiction. And that's why I want to talk about this real briefly. This is a paper that is currently in the process of reviewed and talks about structured accountability. And essentially the research question that we try to answer here is, how does structured accountability affect entrepreneurial outcomes? And the treatment is exactly the following. We ask entrepreneurs, or the program, the accelerator asks entrepreneurs on a periodic basis, like once a month, what would you say are the key strategic tasks that need to work on until the next meeting? And how was your progress on the committed tasks since your last meeting? So basically it's like think about it like a boss who is supervising these startups. And there are two settings. One is platoons. We can talk about that in a minute or later if you want. And then the other one is boards. And so the platoons are all about peers getting together and sharing information. And the boards are all about one entrepreneur basically reporting to external board members or mentors. These are the results. We can come back to this later if you're interested, but it's basically to show you that the results are pretty robust. And we do a quantitative and qualitative analysis. And in a nutshell, this is basically the pitch, which I think is very interesting. Graduate education founders want more structured accountability. In other words, they like the fact that there is structured accountability, but they appear to be hurt by it, or at least unaffected. Okay. In contrast, undergraduate education founders do not appreciate being having this structured accountability, and yet they do benefit from it. Okay, so there's a dilemma there that is, I think, is interesting to look into. And this is my last question, which is, why is this even important? And this goes to what Rasmus mentioned in the beginning, right? So we know there's enough literature to show us that entrepreneurship accounts for a large proportion of job creation and benefit and well-being for society. So a better understanding of the underlying mechanisms and causal effects of accelerators designs features can help us complement and let me bring back this concept of natural selection model, which is having everybody compete against each other, with a more humanitarian approach where we can intervene and influence. So with that, I wrap it up and open it up for questions.
Let me get a head start on one of the questions, and then we'll take some from the audience. You can write them in the chat, by the way, if you're not comfortable with, speaking publicly in a Zoom, then just write them in the chat. No, I'm wondering, you had a slide on the different typologies, and you had the investor-led, the ecosystem-led, and then the corporate-led, or what was the name, matchmaking. And here you kind of presented it as they would have to use, the Google XSpark, or no, that was Microsoft that had that, the different programs that they have in platforms, so they start using whatever. But isn't it also, for many corporates, a way of innovating? I mean, that it's not just about using the platform that they provide, but it's actually trying to see where their own business is going through the startups and having like a first right of refusal for buying them or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great question, Rasmus. And there's this concept that you're probably familiar with, which is corporate venture capital, right? So essentially, you can start mixing these mechanisms in different ways, right? But so corporate venture capital is about, okay, I'll give you some money and also give you some support about using my systems or things like that, or maybe my sales channels, et cetera, et cetera. And so yes, I think that you're completely right that once you understand these different elements, you can start mixing them in ways that could potentially work. I have a saying, or you might have heard it in Chile, and it's in English, I think it also works, that it's better to teach somebody how to fish then give them a fish, because by teaching them how to fish, they become self-sufficient. I like saying it's better to teach people how fish think and work so that they can design their own tools for reaching their goals, right? So, there's the level of, go ahead, sorry, your microphone is off.
So Jesus actually made a big mistake there when he turned bread into more bread, or what was it again? Are there any questions in the chat? Have you seen Yelmer? Do you want to?
Yes, someone will raise his hand, so I'll give the floor to him. Go ahead.
I've raised my hand. Yeah, yes. Can I go ahead? Michael, thanks for even as brief as 15 minutes was, highly enlightening and totally open kind of presentation. So lots, I guess, take away. I think I'm very much in the Michael Leatherby school of thought when it comes to the benefits of accelerators. I have two questions. One is
maybe we should just know who you are.
Oh, pardon. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wisa Kabaka. I'm right now in Cape Town. I work at Hyber Group. I'm a partner for Southern Africa there, but we're also partners with the Creative Business Network in South Africa and across the continent of Africa as well. So again, if you have any need to come and explore anything in Africa, please reach out to the CBN team Global, and then put you in touch with us. So Michael, like I said, I'm very much in the Michael Leatherby school of thought on this, and I'm actually looking forward to receiving your paper when it's finally peer reviewed. I have two questions on my end. One is an opinion of yours, very controversially. So Rasmus must close his ears. The second one, is a reflection on an experience that I have that I think I would love to see your thoughts or hear your thoughts on it. So on the first point, as an opinion of yours, an organization like CBN, I'm not sure how much you know about the work that CBN does. If you compare CBN in its reach, in its context, its impact, why is CBN not building a Y Combinator-esque type of accelerator program? And again, would you be the kind of person who, based on your thoughts, because again, the creative industry as an economic and GDP driver, as an investment opportunity, platform, and as an innovation catalyst, ultimately should be shaping the world. I mean, you have billion-dollar valued companies like the likes of Airbnb that are companies supported through the acceleration programs of YC. Now, suddenly a YC looks far more credible as an organization globally than a CBN, which does similar impactful work, but doesn't necessarily develop billion-dollar valued companies or listed companies. So that would be an opinion, first of all, and again, hopefully to convince Rasmus to finally decide to build the YC accelerator for the creative industry.
You'll have it in your inbox this evening. This evening you'll have it in your inbox.
As long as you got Michael backing it. So I would like to hear Michael's opinion. The second point is I've had the very good fortune of traveling the world. In fact, meeting Rasmus, I met Rasmus in Malaysia many years ago. And part of my travels have taken me to all the top innovation ecosystems across the globe, one of which is Israel, which I think everybody knows very well. And one of the things that I learned in Israel that I'm always curious to understand from others is that they have a model there where if it's a state-funded accelerator or incubator program, its reporting line sits independently of itself. So you don't have program owners designing and developing impact assessment reports. They call in academic, they use the state economic department or the state statistician general to do the impact assessments of the value creation and development. In most other countries, I've not seen this experience. As a result, why I believe there's a huge failure of these kind of programs is because, especially on our continent in Africa, too many of these accelerators are reporting themselves. So again, I know I run accelerator programs myself here. You know, I'm allowed to say whatever I want. So even if my accelerator is bad, I can write very nice things about myself and make an objective reasoning around why maybe certain failures or certain things didn't work out. What is your thoughts on this type of reporting framework? And did you, by any chance, look into this in terms of accountability context around the efficacy of impact that these accelerators have?
Wow, thank you so much for those really awesome questions. I think we should have had this whole conversation around your questions. So let me go with the first one. So why not CBN a Y Combinator accelerator, right? I hear from Rasmus's comment that I think you're moving in that direction. I don't know, but let me just throw back some questions to you that you might want to think about, right? So would you be doing this for profit, or would you be doing this for the ecosystem, right? Because if you're doing this for profit, then it would be an investor-led accelerator. So basically you put in money and you're observing these startups and seeing in which ones you want to invest, because within the 3 months or the 6 months, you're actually able to see much better. It's like a due diligence of a whole bunch of different startups to some degree. And then you have this unfair advantage of being able to say, oh, this accelerator number 5 looks a lot better than accelerator number 1 and number 20. I mean, sorry, not accelerator, startup number 5 looks a lot better than startup number 1 or number 20. So let's put money into that and try to make some money out of it, right? But if what you're trying to do is improve the ecosystem, in other words, provide, for example, entrepreneurial capital to all the people who are in the CBN network, then your focus should be different, right? Now, that doesn't mean, and I go back to my comment about the phishing, if you understand the mechanisms, you can invent your own tools and invent your own accelerator design, and maybe make a mixture between profit-led and ecosystem-led, or a NGO or B Corp kind of structure. I have two chapters on business accelerators on a book that's called Accelerators, edited by Mike Wright, that talks about key performance indicators and selection issues. 2 chapters, and you might want to look at I'm happy to share that with you. You might want to look at the key performance indicators, because you kind of have to decide your goals. Why would you want to do an accelerator? And there are, I don't know, 50 different key performance indicators that you could choose from, but you should kind of choose the ones that are consistent with your vision or mission, right? Now, I want to build on something that we talked with Rasmus before we started this session, which has to do with uncertainty. And the creative industry is fraught with uncertainty. You don't know from the beginning whether a movie or a plot is going to be a great hit and very attractive to people or not. In contrast, we were talking about making cheese. So cheese is much less uncertain in terms of your success. So some of the features that can be built into accelerators have to do with helping participants deal with uncertainty, or manage uncertainty. So one of the things that people talk about entrepreneurs is that they're good at managing uncertainty. And what does uncertainty mean? And let me just contrast uncertainty with risk. Risk is the knowledge of the probability of a certain outcome. So for example, if you invite me to a game of tossing a coin, and you say, if it's heads, I win. If it's tails, I lose. I know exactly the probability of winning that game, which is 50%. And based on my risk tolerance, I can decide whether I want to play that game or not. Uncertainty is telling me a game where you say, look, I've got a dice that you don't know if it has colors or numbers, and you will win if you get the color red. I don't know anything about that game. I have no way to assess whether that game is going to be successful or not for me, because I don't even know if there even is a red color in that game. So uncertainty reduction is all about learning and figuring out what that dice is really made of, right? And so there are different techniques, such as, for example, the lean startup method, that helps you kind of reduce that uncertainty. There's a paper by you in 2020, I think it is, that she also looks at how accelerators are a space for experimentation. You give people some money, you give people the ability to talk to other people, and they experiment, learn, and they reduce their uncertainty. And by reducing that uncertainty, then they are able to make better decisions. So to the extent that CBN could maybe set up these kind of programs to help your members reduce that uncertainty and make better decisions, or experiment cheaply, shall we say, I think that might be a good thing. And then the second question, and Rasmus, feel free to interrupt me if you.
I could maybe say something about the uncertainty thing, that it's more than being, as an entrepreneur, used to uncertainty or being okay with it. There's a reason why Tom Hanks and Nicole Kidman are in most movies, and that's because it reduces the uncertainty for the sale of that movie. So there are in all industries, whether you're in wool mittens or whatever it is, that tricks you can do and you can learn as an entrepreneur in the creative industries to reduce that uncertainty, and not just as a coping, psychological coping strategy.
Right, exactly. So there are different ways in which you can reduce or manage uncertainty. Now, one thing that people tend to believe is that entrepreneurs are are not risk averse. In other words, they are very prone to risk, and people believe that because they observe entrepreneurs acting in very uncertain environments. But what an external observer doesn't know is that those entrepreneurs who manage uncertainty actually know things that the external observers don't know. And therefore, entrepreneurs are actually turning uncertainty into risk, right? Because they're learning about the real probability of success of something, right? But from the external observer who doesn't have that information, they look at the entrepreneurs and say, these people are crazy because they're working in a world that is so unknown. But what good entrepreneurs actually do is that they actually try to manage uncertainty by reducing uncertainty or transforming uncertainty into risk. So basically, it's reducing their lack of knowledge about the probability of success into a better knowledge of the probability of success, and then deciding whether they want to play that game, and that's where the risk tolerance comes into play. Now, if you want, I can talk about the second question about self-reporting success, right, of accelerators. And I have this discussion with the Chilean government a lot, and I'm very happy to see that after several years of predicating this idea of understanding the causal relations, right? And I go back to the words of Rasmus in the beginning. If we understand the causal relations, that more of A gives you more of B, then you can make good decisions about A, right? If you don't know the causal relationships, you can think that maybe more of A gives you more of B, when in reality it doesn't. And you just keep on doing more of A, but it doesn't really give you more of B. So to the extent that countries or societies or even accelerators are able to self-govern their ability to test the causal effects of their policies, the causal effects of their interventions, that will increase the, let me say, knowledge and intelligence of their decision making, right? So there's this program, this entity in Chile that is the government, is part of the state or the government, which is called, translated, it's like the direction of budgets. And so they basically have to approve all the budgets of the country or the government. And they have developed now a unit that is trying to assess the causal effects of the different policies, right? And let me just make a distinction between results and effects. Because as an accelerator, you many times report your results. How many people you invested in, or how many people graduated from your program, or how many jobs were created by the people that went into your program. And you say, we're doing a great job. And if you only say it like that, you might be cheating yourself or basically, cheating yourself, because maybe if you didn't exist, those jobs would have been created anyways. Or maybe if you didn't exist, more jobs would have been created, which is even worse, right? So it's super important to distinguish between results and effects, right? So I think that language creates realities, and to the extent that you are able to use the right language, maybe you can change the way people think in your own accelerator and also in your ecosystem, right? So try to use language correctly, right? Correlation is not causation. Results is not necessarily effects. Not sure if that answers your question, Boo.
We also have a
Thanks,
question
Michael.
from,
Yeah.
we also have a question from Carlos Mancia. Do you want to unmute, Carlos? Let's see. Are you still there, Carlos?
Or I can read it. So the question from Carlos, and feel free to open your mic if you want, Carlos. But the question is, have you ever seen a focused social impact startup ecosystem with social impact investors? So I'm not an expert in social impact investing, but I do know that at least here in Chile and probably in other parts of the world, there is a group of people who are doing social impact investing. So to the extent that these groups can learn about the causal relations or the mechanisms of the business accelerator logic and also the incubator logics, then they will be able to hopefully build better tools to achieve their goals, right? So we go back to the analogy of the fishing. If I teach you how to fish, all I'm doing is giving you a recipe. Do A, do B, do C. If I teach you how fish work, you can design your own recipes, right? And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do. Teach you theory. There's a saying that says there's nothing more practical than a good theory. And my hope is that by giving you this theory, you are able to design your own practical tools. Does that make sense?
I can see that Carlos is still with us, but maybe he's not quite there. Any other questions? Anyone raise your hand if you have a question for Michael Leatherby. Otherwise, I would like to hear
in the chat, Carlos, if you're not able to unmute your microphone, if you have got your answer.
Yeah.
Ivana has a question.
Go for it.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivana. I'm based in Switzerland, running a company also here. I have a question to you, Michael. By the way, great presentation. Thank you for sharing with us. Could you give us examples of, let's say, your favorite example of, what's happened in the startups in Chile and your, let's say, not that favorite example? What were the differences between both? And, basically, why did you like them or you didn't like them at the end?
That's great questions, Ivana. One of the thoughts that comes to my mind with your question has to do with this study that looks at the cultural interaction, right? When we were talking with Rasmus about the social comparison and social learning. And social learning is about learning other people's behaviors. So for example, if you and I interact and you have certain behaviors that I consider are valuable, then the theory argues that I will start adopting those behaviors, right? So for example, if you are good at getting up early in the morning and going to do exercise, and I've always kind of not done that, I observe you do it, and I start mimicking or copying your behavior, right? So that what I thought was—
That's not the case. That's not the case. So there's nothing you can learn from me.
Well, so that's something that I found was interesting, because the behaviors of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, for example, which was a large portion of the people who were coming to the Startup Chile, were more about questioning the status quo, experimenting, networking with people that are different than them. And so when you compared the behaviors of those entrepreneurs with the behaviors of the Chilean entrepreneurs, you could see that the Chilean entrepreneurs had lower levels of those behaviors. And there's literature that shows that people who have higher levels of those behaviors have higher performance when it comes to entrepreneurship, because you're essentially learning more, you're managing uncertainty better, et cetera, making better decisions. So when these two groups came together, the Chilean entrepreneurs learned those behaviors of these foreign entrepreneurs, right? And so Chilean entrepreneurs actually started behaving more in those ways relative to the control group, which was Chilean entrepreneurs who did not have the opportunity to have that exposure. The other part of the theory is social comparison, and I thought this was also pretty cool. And I'm not sure if it's going to resonate with you guys, because it's all very cultural based, what I'm going to share with you. But in Chile, there's this belief that if you're successful and you are from the United States or from Europe, it's because you are from the United States or you are from Europe, right? So it's like this self-imposed belief that if you're from Chile, you have a limit to growth. There's no way you can do better than a certain limit, right? And so social comparison is about comparing your capabilities, right? So for example, let's just imagine, Ivana, that you have gone up to the Everest, right? To the top of the Everest. And I always thought I could never go to the top of the Everest, right? And I get to know you and we start talking. And I see that you are roughly the same age as me, roughly similar physique. And I say, wow, if Ivana was able to go to the Everest, maybe I can do it too, right? So my own like self-imposed barrier to growth is broken as a consequence to my comparison with you, right? And so that's what we observed also in Startup Chile. You had these foreign entrepreneurs who were coming in and doing these very audacious projects compared to the Chilean entrepreneurs. And the Chilean entrepreneurs started comparing themselves to the foreign entrepreneurs, and they realized that they had similar levels of intelligence, similar levels of technological capabilities, but the foreign entrepreneurs were doing things that were really audacious. And that's what made the Chilean entrepreneurs kind of breach these self-imposed barriers to growth, right? So
I need to ask you the follow-up question here because it's very interesting. So what are the reasons why the Chilean entrepreneurs have this type of behavior? Because it can be cultural, of course, but it can be also social and also educational. That's the way maybe we were brought up, or maybe we were taught at the schools.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know the causes of those self-imposed barriers to growth. But you mentioned several of potential causes, right? And it also has to do with self-efficacy. If I teach a child that they will never be able to succeed, then I'm also basically teaching them not to be self-efficacious, right? Or efficacious. So
Michael,
yeah.
I have a question. Michael, I have a question around digitization. Like these social comparisons have been a lot around. You know, like they have partied together. They have been drinking Chilean beer and they've had a good time, etc. Now we spent a year, and maybe we'll spend more time in Zoom calls. Do you already have some? Have you seen some fully digital accelerators where the participants actually never meet, but they are still able to achieve the same or maybe even better results? I know one of those that were establishing Startup Chile was Torsten Kohlin and YouNoodle, and he actually argues that the more digital an evaluation is, the less emotional it is, the more exact it will be. The more you have better predictions of success if you go digital than going real in person. Do you have any either regional, national, or global accelerators that are digitally where they actually never meet neither the speakers nor each other?
Wow, that is such an important question, Rasmus. And I think that we still have so much to learn about that. I do not have any expertise in observing any digitally based or 100% digital accelerators, but I do have some thoughts that come to mind. I teach a course on innovation entrepreneurship at the School of Engineering at my university, and it's for 800 students per year, right? It's a mandatory entrepreneurship innovation course for all engineers. And it looks very much like a business accelerator. They need to figure out a problem, develop a solution, build the business model, and present it at the end. And the winners actually get money to develop their projects, right? So very much like a business accelerator. And something that we noticed when we had to go into remote teaching is that everybody was more exhausted, but the projects were actually much better than the projects that were done in the year where we were all face-to-face, right? At least that was the assessment of several of the professors there. They were like, wow, we're really impressed at how well these students are actually doing. Now, I do not have the exact counterfactual, so maybe it was some other reason, but it's an observed, I mean, it's not something that I just want to share with you in as observation. And you could argue that, well, students have less time to party and they are wasting less time in transportation. And so therefore they're spending more effort in this, right? So that could argue the positive side of digital or remote learning, but then you can also imagine all the negative sides, which has to do with spontaneous interactions. I mean, how many times have you become inspired by a conversation that you weren't planning to have, right? And so that is super important. So one of the things that I look forward to is how, as a society, we're able to build those spontaneous moments of interaction being remote, right? So how can we build a platform where, for some reason, I am able to bump into you, Rasmus, for a virtual coffee in a way that we weren't expecting, and we start talking and sharing ideas, and that inspires us, right? So I think that's what's a little bit missing still in the Zoom platforms, so that we can actually have a more closer experience to being face to face.
We have about 2 minutes left, ladies and gentlemen, with Michael Leatherby. There are lots of I have lots of unanswered questions, so we could do another session next week. No, but we'll get back to you for sure. But anyone with the last question, or do you, Michael, have any things that is good to think about if you want to, in the creative industries, for example, make a global accelerator?
Yeah, great. Well, maybe we can take the last question. I think there's one hand up, and again, I'm happy to.
There's one? Okay, I couldn't see that. Who has a hand up? Do we know?
Tushi or something.
Yeah, hi all. Tushi. Thank you for trying. I'm going to try to keep it very short. That maybe you can share some links later on. I can check, doesn't matter. But now you are here, so I just wanted to ask you that this year I'm hosting Creative Business Cup Istanbul in Turkey. And we've been working on that, supporting creatives with business tools and approaches for some time. And we were on a way to design an accelerator program for them after the cup, but we met few business mentors, and they mentioned the concept of a venture studio. So we decided to transform our approach to that. So have you ever heard, or do you know any successful venture studios whose focuses on only creative entrepreneurs? I'm very curious in that sense.
Great, thank you very much for that question, Tuche. Can you please explain to me what a venture studio is? I hadn't heard about that concept.
Venture studio is, apparently there are max 200 globally. It works like an accelerator program, but after all, when you get the training is free. And the owner of that venture studio, they got some revenue share. So they match you with big companies and they share the revenue, and therefore they earn their money. But also that's why they support entrepreneur and enterprise to match and to grow. So it's win-win for three of them. And instead of just teaching and sort of like leaving and letting them to fall from table and letting them with their destiny and their own network, they are literally like matching them with big companies. Sometimes switching, this can be also recruitment models of big companies such as Facebook or Nike or Adidas, that instead of they are training some people, they are matching with entrepreneurs and growing together.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so I'm not an expert in venture studios, but just a quick thought about that. When you match small or startups with large organizations, that matching process can be very, very tricky, because there are so many things that can go wrong just because of the institutional kind of like cultures or norms or processes that large organizations have, so that they can actually do well, clash so much with what new ventures need. So I guess my first reaction is it's a tricky thing to manage when you bring together a startup with an established organization. But I'm happy, Rasmus, to, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but we have reached 2 minutes past the hour. I have another Zoom meeting that actually started 2 minutes ago. I can leave it to Yelmer and to Georgios and to Michael to finish off this this webinar. I think I'll do that so I can just discreetly leave. Michael, it was great listening to your presentation, and we'll be in touch with you on the future development of this, maybe an accelerator for the CBN. But thanks, everyone. I'll leave it to you, Jelmer and Georgios, to steer it all to a good final. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so Tuche, I think you were wanted to say something else to wrap up.
Yeah, the reason that I've decided to focus that one instead of the that only training programs, that I noticed that big companies, they open position almost every day, big positions in also most of the design segment or engineering or coding and etc. Like it is more like digital creative production, let's say. And they put a lot of effort to find the right person, and when they find it, they train them, or they pay money to companies, recruitment companies, to train them. So there's already an effort and budget to find the right match. And in that sense, our question was like, can we transform that need to as a matching intention? Because in other sense that I believe supporting creative freedom as well, that solopreneurs and professional freelancers and etc. So you don't have to be that excited big sort of like startup that to be successful. So in that sense that, okay, how they can still stay independent and doing quality job, but also they can match with the other opportunities. So this is an experiment with these intentions, I can say.
Yeah. Well, there's so many fun things to experiment and try, right? And what you're describing sounds really interesting. Just a whole bunch of ideas come to mind. I would be happy to talk to you about them at some point. And you're probably familiar with the concept of acqui-hires, which is where basically you basically acquire a company or a startup just because you want their talent, not necessarily because you want the product. And so these, when you bring together startups and large corporations, some great things can happen, but some things can also break, right? So I think that's, the challenge that you might have.
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, there will be a lot of failures, I can imagine. But I thought that it can be worth to try, because mostly that creative production seems as an added value or nice to have, or I hope we can reach that point to hire these designers, but later kind of thing. So if we can sort of transform those independent creation something desirable from that sense, that can be something interesting. But yeah, I was curious that have you ever heard any successful ones who focuses on creative entrepreneurs? Because there are few focuses on tech startups, of course. I mean, everything starts with them.
Yeah. I don't have much more experience on that specific area. I can just bring ideas from theory and try to share with you the theories, so that then you can design your own fishing poles and things like that.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yes, I think we are going to wrap up. We are a little bit over time, but that's not a problem, of course. Thank you, Michael.